After entering a castle full of monsters without knowing it, he took possession of her body and cursed her brother. And here Claudine stood up while reaching out his hands to her and saying, "Here, come and drink." Ray looked at him in shock and started sweating, and her hands became trembling as she said, "No, why drink that?" And at the same time, she says to herself, "What's wrong with me?" And here Lady Claudine looked as she continued and said to herself, "Why is this smell so sweet?" Then she looked at Claudine's veins as she said, "It's attractive, like a delicious and sugary drink. I want to sink my teeth into his neck, taste his taste, just once." So she went to him quickly and grabbed his hands and did the title of blood. And here Claudine was looking at her laughing. Then he told her Ray as she continued to lick his hands, so he asked her and said, "Is it good?" And here Ray looked at him and said, "Claudine, only a little. I promise I won't make it painful." But Claudine grabbed it and said, "Don't mind it, Ray. You can get this any time." And Ray said, "Do you mean that?" And Claudine said, "For sure. Here, come with me." Then he took her to bed, and here he looked at her and laughed and said, "Good girl." Then he gave her his neck while smiling and saying, "Satisfy yourself." And here I looked at him in shock. Then she got up and drank his blood, and that's when Claudine told her, "Honey on you. I'm not going anywhere." And here my opinion ended, and she started saying to herself, "I feel like it hot, and I feel uncomfortable down there, and I feel weird." And here she blushed because she became a monster like him and she had sexual desire like him. So Claudine looked at her sweating and said to her Ray, and here she was stunned by what was happening to her, as she said to herself, "But why do I need to step back?" And they did that together, and each of them took out his lust on the other. But she did not yet comprehend the change that happened to her. Another day, Claudine took her through the forest to magical waters, and he tells her, "Let's go together." And she went with him, looking around and saying, "This one, isn't it the way home, is it?" Then she asked him and said, "Where are we going, Claudine?" But he didn't answer her, and he was holding her hands. And here, when I looked outside the wall, I found the same maze that I dreamed of, and little Claudine takes it to her, so she was stunned and said, "Odd, I feel like I've been here before." And Claudine, in astonishment, said to her, "It's true?" And here Ray laughed as she said, "Ah, I remember. You and I came here once holding hands just like this, and I didn't know the exit was too far away. I miss everyone terribly." And here Claudine asked her and said, "Ray, do you have a secret boyfriend hidden away in the estate? You keep talking about how you want to come back and see him." And here she looked at him, and in tension she said, "No, this is not so. It's been a long time since we've seen them all." Claudine pressed her hands and looked at her angrily and said, "But perfectly good, if it's just the two of us." And here Ray looked at him silently and then said, "I guess it's too late to go back there, right? Let's just walk in the gardens today." And when she asked him and she said again, "Claudine, where are we going?" But he didn't answer her, and when they entered a dark forest, she said nervously, "We were only before." But Claudine pulled it out and said, "Come on." And here I asked him Ray, and she said, "Do you come here more often?" And Claudine said, "It is the only forest I can visit, and I wanted to show you." And here Ray looked at him nervously as she said, "But this place." Then she continued to herself, looking around and saying a bit dark and scary, "Like the place where the beast that eats children lives. I'm scared, I want to go back." So she told him, "Claudine, can we?" But she was stunned when she saw the pool of water and started looking at her as she said, "Oh, it's so beautiful. I've never seen a lake like this before." And suddenly a little fairy banged in her face, so he grabbed her and she says, "Well, is it a fairy?" Then in happiness she said, "They really exist." And here came others, so she said, "They're so beautiful." At this time, Claudine lit a cigar and smoke came out on one of the fairies who was affected by him. So Ray looked at him nervously and said, "Claudine, don't smoke that here. I don't think they like it." But Claudine looked at her and said, "Who cares about them?" And Ray, in shock, said, "The what?" And that's when Claudine told her, "Don't bother, I'll put it down." And here Ray looked at the nationality, and she says to herself, "It's so tough. We haven't stepped outside in a while, and I wanted Claudine to enjoy himself too. But what is the use if it will be like this?" So she told him, "Let's go home, I'm tired." But suddenly she noticed a rabbit. And here her instinct moved like a vampire, and she looked into the eyes of the rabbit. And when he ran away, her hands turned and her nails grew. And here she said, "Claudine, I go first." At the time, the fairies are trying to stop it. But she went after the rabbit, and she says just became very hungry. And here she started running after the rabbit and extended his hands to him as she said, "Very close. Over there, I'll get it with my bare hands, and I wonder what the rabbit blood tastes like one bite." She actually grabbed him, but she was surprised that he was trembling, and when I looked into his eyes, I found him crying, and here I felt stunned. Then she remembered when she was a child, and she said to herself, "Just yes. Rabbits are my favorite animals in the whole world." So Hess asked her and said, "Is that your favorite, ma'am?" So I woke up and let him go, and she keeps going into herself and says, "What? Did I?" Then she sat on the floor saying, "What did she become? Rabbit hunting? The desire to drink their blood hunting tweaked? I want to drink her blood." So in amazement she said, "Something is very wrong, I must have gone crazy." And here in shock she said, "Wait for me. Blood." And here she remembered when Claudine gave her blood, and when he told her, "I see rapid progress," and when he gave her medicine and said, "It's time for your medicine," and when she refused and told her, "You said you'd be with me forever." So she got up, and she said to herself, "Claudine wouldn't do such a thing to me. We may not have a wedding, but we are husband and wife. There's no reason for Claudine to do this to me. That's a curse." And here she remembered when Claudine was telling her, "I love you, Ray." But she said, "Not love." The worst possible curse. And here she went, and she continues and says to herself, "I have to go back to Cluden first. He must be worried that I ran away like this." Yes, and dialogue. That's what we need. And suddenly an injured fairy came to her, so I looked at her in amazement, and she said, "A fairy." Then she said to herself, "Who would do like this? How did she get injured like that?" And here I remembered when Claudine said, "Who cares about them?" So in shock she said, "It can't be." And here the scene changes as he listens to Claudine, the fairies saying, "Depending on, have you seen? Yes, I did turn it into a monster. That's unfortunate. Someone like her is our last magician. Where did the girl go? She went chasing some shade in the forest. I wouldn't be surprised if she died in one of these days." And the other fairy said, "You mean like his guide, don't you?" This angered Claudine, and he threw his cigarette for us. "I told you, shut your mouths." And here the genie told them, "Did we say anything false? Yes, you will end up killing that girl. You are the devil incarnate." And here in anger, Claudine said, "I gotta tear your mouth off." So he squeezed it in his hands and then put it on the ground and stepped on it with his foot. And here Ray came and screamed and said, "Stop that." And here said one of the fairies, "How dare you? This is a sacred lake." And here Claudine said, "Do you own it?" "I do not think so. You are alive only because of the lake pond. And now you don't want to shut up." That's where she said, "Ray, that's not why I wanted to walk." "Claudine, what did you do? I asked you. What did you do, Claudine?" And here I turn to her as she continues and says, How could I want to trust you? And I did it. But I can't look the other way anymore." Then she looked at him and she said, "Why did you do such a thing? Tell me. Why?" Then she smiled in amazement at what he did to her and said, "I'm wrong, right? Why do you want to turn me into a monster?" And here Claudine said, "Because I felt like it." And here she looked at him in shock as she said, "The what?"